Just for
Hello, I'm Dr. Hung Vu, and our show is America's Healthcare Crisis. The title of our show tonight is The Meaning of Sex. Within 2 short decades, from the 60s to the 80s, the American attitude regarding sex has evolved rapidly from one extreme to another. During the 60s, many Americans were totally absorbed with the so-called freedom of sexual expression that sometimes included the most bizarre and even destructive sexual behavior. Then came the reality of the AIDS epidemics in the 80s that has brought free sex and free love to a screeching halt, so that nowadays, not only are Americans talking about abstinence, many are actually practicing it. Such a drastic change in attitude regarding a fundamental human function makes any discussion of sexual matters at once fascinating and strenuous. Needless to say, our sexual behavior can have very significant impact upon our health. In the current climate of AIDS and sexual violence, the difference between safe and unsafe sex practice can mean the difference between life and death. Within the scope of discussion for our program tonight, I'd like to dissect how our sexual behavior can be influenced not so much by how we feel instinctively, but rather by what we learn and observe in real life. And to help me with this task, I'm delighted to have with me 2 experts on the subject. Dr. Carol Fabric is a psychoanalyst. She's a Ph.D. She practices in Fremont. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Good. It's good to see you here tonight. Dr. Marvin Firestone is a psychiatrist in practice in Half Moon Bay, and he's also an attorney. He's the president of the American College of Legal Medicine. He has been with us several times before, and I'm very happy to welcome him back tonight.
Thank you, and welcome. I'm glad to be welcomed back to your program.
Thank you for being here again. Actually, by getting ready for this show, I have been forced to look at my personal experiences on the subject, and it's rather strenuous exercise. But I have to say that for myself, sex has had different meanings to me in different times, at different times of my, my evolution or my growth. But there's one thing that is, that has always been true, and that is the way I feel about sex has something directly to do with the way I feel about myself. It's like my self-discovery that influence the way I behave, I feel about sex. So let's talk about that, because I think that one of the things that has been lacking for me is a deficiency or lack of education and role modeling. What has been your experience in that direction or that area?
I think it's. I think there has been almost no role modeling whatsoever. You know, Erik Erikson, who studied life cycles, talks about the different needs that we have and the different tasks that we as individuals have at various ages. You know, when we're very small, and when we're teenagers, and when we're young adults, and then when we're older in the population. And I think that what you were describing in terms of your own sexuality being different at different stages, I think it really fits what he describes too. You have different significance. Sexuality takes on different significance when you're 11 years old, or when you're 17, or when you're 25, or when you're 35, or when you're 55. And I think I would like to certainly explore that with you all. And I've been studying and talking about that a lot with my clients, my friends, my family members, and everybody has a different point of view. When I asked my daughter, who's 28, she said, "Mom, birds do it, bees do it, even monkeys in the trees do it."
How old is your daughter?
Oh, that one was 28.
28.
That was very off-key.
What was your experience with sexual education when you were growing up as a teenager?
Well, I probably learned most of what I knew at that time from my friends. But I think our attitudes about sex, to a great extent, not only reflect our, as you pointed out, our feelings about ourselves, but also our attitudes about relationships with others. And I think sex, to a great extent, is a modifier of that relationship. It's hard, I think, at this time, as we get older, and look at the word sex, it becomes more of a modifier of a relationship than it did when, perhaps maybe when we were younger, in adolescence, being told about the various stories and accomplishments and conquests of our peers in the locker room and so forth.
It just amazes me that in the current climate of information explosion in our country, I mean, we're at the zenith of information everywhere, and we see sex everywhere in the American culture. And yet, the kind of education that our children are getting in school is very primitive, or
Mechanistic.
mechanistic, and almost devoid of any significant, profound meaning that has some value to it. Like, you know, I was talking to my niece the other day, and she said that all what they taught in school nowadays is anatomy. I mean, what you see, the vagina, the penis, all those terms, but they are totally devoid of any kind of emotional attachment or higher meaning than that.
So we don't have any master teacher who really knows about sexuality and knows what it could mean or should mean ultimately to our own development as a self, as an individual, and as in terms of each other. So we don't have any modeling. Where are we going to get this from?
Right.
You know, this last week when I was really looking for some information on sexuality for myself, I turned to some Tantra yoga books because they were talking about sexuality in a much more spiritual way, using it as a sacred act, as a way of honoring each other, of seeing the highest in each other, and having it be contained in a couple relationship, one that's loving and caring and respects and honors each of the parties. But I don't think that that's the attitude of the general public. And I think it's mainly not the attitude because nobody has known, nobody's been speaking up about it. You know, we see sexuality in the movies, but nobody has a dialogue during those sex scenes, even in terms of how much they're loving or admiring or appreciating the other person. It's all physical. When was the last time you heard someone actually say something in a sex scene that was appreciative or loving or had heart, you know?
Well, sometimes there is sexuality that one does not realize is the big sex, but is a portrayal of a warm, intimate relationship. We don't think of that as sex, but in fact, that may be very sexual, meaningful, spiritual, just as you point out.
Connection
and
intimacy.
And then there is the aspect of, well, can a sexual relationship be a playful one, or must it be a serious spiritual encounter? And I think there's some people who can combine the two. It can be playful as well as spiritual, and then others who feel somehow to be playful doesn't fit in with their concept of how they want to have an intimate relationship with a spouse or a loved one.
See, what has occurred to me is that personally, as I have grown to be more comfortable with myself, sex has a totally different meaning in that it becomes a sort of like icing on the cake. You know, it's no big deal. It's a very wonderful thing, and I feel very comfortable. I don't have to struggle with it. And yet, through my whole life, I had no one to show me or to share with the kind of experience that has some, like you say, the term is appreciation, or sharing, or communicating, or anything like that. It's just like emotion and act. And a lot of that was acted out because I have noticed that even for me, and I'm sure that the shared common denominator with a lot of other people is that they act out sexually when things are not going well in other spheres of their lives. Like if they're frustrated, they're unhappy, they're lonely, or they are unsuccessful in realizing certain other goals, they find gratification in sex, which to me is kind of a sad thing. You know,
it's like an addiction in some ways. It can be. It can also just be wonderfully sensual. I mean, just like eating, touching. You know, that's another way of satisfying the impulses and having something to do. And there's nothing really wrong or bad about it. It's just that it's not the whole story.
Yeah, I have been feeling that sex is such a powerful energy, form of energy, and we can channel that into different direction. When you feel aroused, which is really in the initiation of any awareness of sex, we can do a number of different things, and each one is a choice, really, and really it does not have to, or even should not have to, always channel into the act of intercourse, for example. You can be sexually very, very gratified or satisfied doing something other than intercourse. What is your feeling about
I think
that?
that's very true. If intercourse is the end of the sexual arousal or the desire to relate, then sometimes the sexual relationship can be nothing more than a glorified masturbatory experience. Whereas if sex is seen as a spice of the relationship and can augment the fostering of a more intimate understanding between two human beings, it takes on a totally different connotation.
Yeah.
Then you can't see sex as a noun, but you see it as a modifier or an adverb or an adjective, if you want to use grammar, as modifying the relationship, and it has, I think, a much more meaningful, mature way of being a spice of life, so to speak.
Yeah. What are you teaching your children? How many children do you have?
4 children.
4. How old are they?
My oldest is 30, and my youngest is 16. So
what
quite
kind
a
of sexual
very-
education did you give them?
Well, I suppose, and I'm still not clear at this point, whether they learn more from peers than they do from parents. But around the age of early adolescence, I approached each of them to find out just what they thought about relating with other people and how sex played a role in their interactions with others. And frequently I would say, well, do you want me to answer any questions? No.
You're open about it.
Yes.
You're open. That's good.
But frequently the kinds of things I shared with them, they had on some level heard before. But it opens a door for them to approach some of those things at times when they want to, just by introducing the topic, even if they have heard it before.
Yeah.
And I think that that is the important thing, that you're opening the door and inviting them to come to you when they do have questions, and I think setting a model for what a normal or a usual sexual relationship is.
How about you? I mean, you have children?
I have 2 children. Right now they're older. They're 28 and almost 30. And I think there were 2 distinct parts of their sexual education coming from me. When they were really young, like 11, 12, 13, I handed them Lonnie Barbach's book called For Yourself, because they're girls, and I wanted them to know the anatomical part. And also, I told them a lot about my own personal experience, and sort of forced on them that they had to be responsible, that in whatever year it was, in the 80s, that they weren't going to be able to be moms at home, that they were probably going to have kids if they weren't responsible about their sexuality, meaning have birth control pills, birth control of some sort, and choose their partners well. With a sense of care and especially responsibility. Now, they learned that lesson, and now they're at a time in their lives, neither one of them are married yet, and I think possibly because I told them, I said, you have to be responsible, get it, you're it, kid, you know, you're going to have to be probably taking care of yourself, and if you have children now, you're also going to have to be taking care of them. And I think it scared them both off. I don't know that they want to have kids right now. But one of my daughters lives in an ashram that advocates celibacy, and the other one is a woman of the world, flying all over the United States, all over the world, not just the United States, but the whole world, and she does have a monogamous relationship. But they're both exploring right now what that means for them, and they, and I think you talked earlier about abstinence and celibacy, and I think a lot of people, even my friends my age, are saying, you know, perhaps that's not where my focus needs to be, on my sexuality or having a mate, but more on attaining a wholeness within my own self right now. And so they're kind of drawing that sexual energy that may have been focused outward in the world, to, you know, searching for the perfect man, searching for the perfect woman, and now they're looking at, how can I be that woman or that person in my life that I want to be for me, so that I can feel whole and blissful and love myself and not necessarily need a partner to satisfy that in me, to satisfy that other stuff.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I have just inherited 2 daughters. I mean, just 2 stepdaughters, because I just got engaged to a lady who has 2 teenage daughters. And I have to say that if I would like to share some guidance or experience with them, I would probably educate them obliquely, not talking about sex per se, but talking about themselves and how they should foster a sense of confidence, self-respect. I believe that if they have that, they would know what to do with their body, regardless of what you teach. So to me, sex is irrelevant. It's the result of the way they feel about themselves. Yes. And I trust them would use that self-confidence to project sexually in a meaningful and positive manner.
The only thing that's very difficult when kids are, you know, 10, 12, 14 years old, they're very their peers are very important to them, and and their power as young, you know, girls in the world, young boys, and they have they notice that girls with bosoms have more power, or men who are boys who have muscles have more apparent power. So
you use the word power. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit, because the top of the news nowadays is on sexual violence, and unfortunately, it seems to me that in a pervasive power struggle ambiance in our culture, unfortunately, sex takes on a destructive and negative vibe, in that it's a power struggle between, like, the male dominance and the female manipulation, and it causes a lot of hurt and pain and anger, and it turns into violence. I'd like your experience. I mean, you must counsel patients that have been traumatized and sexually, so I wonder if...
Most of the time, the sexual arena is, not most of the time, but many times the sexual arena takes on the area where the two mates in a marital couple, for instance, can use that as a way of dealing with their communication problems. Because if there is a communication problem, it's going to come out in the way they relate sexually and the way they deal with money.
Yeah.
And one or the other frequently have the issue that they can focus on. And sometimes that's a good starting point in therapy, to focus on how they deal with each other emotionally.
Are you talking about
through the sexual
physical
interaction.
abuse or sexual abuse? I'm not sure.
Well, it could be either. Frequently, it's a blow-up where there is a dispute or a conflict about what each other's expectations are in their relationship. And it frequently is a reaction to the sexual encounter that is frustrating to one or the other, or they're angry about because one spouse is not interested in the other in the way they would like that interest being shown. And that can lead to violence.
It appears to me that people can be usually attracted very strongly to each other physically, and they go through a period of honeymoon when sex is really blissful and wonderful, and then they stop growing together, and that is when problems develop because their sexual relationship doesn't mature in time. They go different direction, and they begin to expect things for themselves, and instead of sharing an experience, they demand of each other to fulfill certain expectations which are totally unrealistic.
Well, I think after that honeymoon phase in a relationship, and these days it usually happens before you're married, that I call the release set in, and people start sharing what they really do in a relationship, you know, and how they live, how they squeeze the toothpaste to whether it's from the bottom or the middle, and then they start getting agitated and irritated about that. And they simply don't know how to resolve these conflicts, these little differences or these expectation differences. And then, like you were saying, sexuality is affected by that because they start distancing each other. So if we, in the schools, for instance, in our churches, wherever, we taught more conflict resolution, I think we'd have healthier marriages, healthier relationships, and probably more sex, actually.
Yeah. It seems to me like, you know, again, we're talking about the icing on the cake again, you know. They build a cake first through a process of meaningful communication. Like one of my professors used to say that if people don't talk or communicate above the belt, they won't do too well below it either.
Very beautiful, very beautiful.
Exactly true.
So, and it's just that to me, it's amazing that we have voluminous research studies and publications everywhere. I mean, everywhere you turn, whether it's on television or newspapers or everywhere, you know, you see sex. And yet, we're very confused about it.
The problem is, just like love, the word sex is very difficult to define for most people. And that's why I suggest that we don't see the word sex as a noun, but as a modifier in some way of a way of relating to another person.
I don't know, I can sort of tell the difference. I mean, if I'm loving, there's a certain kind of blissful feeling inside. But if I'm feeling sexual, then there's sort of an agitation level. There's almost an addiction, like an energy that's an agitation. And for me, sometimes that agitation is very uncomfortable. Whereas if I'm just loving someone, I'm really appreciating them.
But that's a definition for you.
For me, yes.
And
What
that may
about
not
for
be
you?
that may not be the
What
case.
about for you?
Well, I think I've felt a little of some of those both things at different times with different people, at different times in my life as well. Frequently, I have difficulty defining the difference between love and sex at a certain point in a relationship. And I think that's a changing variable. But all I'm saying is only you can define what you mean by a sexual relationship or a loving relationship. Your definition may not fit how I feel a loving relationship is or a sexual relationship is satisfying for me.
Yeah, I wasn't really trying to actually make them be the opposite. I wasn't trying to counter that. It's just that if we really start to pay attention inside of our tummies when we're being loving and when we're being just sexual, or we're caught by the mind, having sexual fantasies, being aroused. You talked about the word arousal. You know, arousal doesn't necessarily mean you have to love someone. You can be aroused, and it can be like an addiction. Yeah, it can be.
That's why I would like to, I have wanted to produce this kind of show, because to me, still we're going back to role modeling. We need to have people who don't think of sex exploitatively or aberrantly or violently, which is abundant all around us. I'd like to have some people who are easy about it, nice and not square, but something that's comfortable with it.
See, I think that for the sexual relationship to give the most satisfaction to a couple, the two of them have to feel comfortable enough with each other so that they want to play. They both have to be wanting to play together. And to get to that,
each other.
Yes, they have to be friends first and comfortable with each other, and there has to be a certain element of it's okay to play, it's okay to be myself, it's okay for you to be yourself and
oh my God,
do your
our
thing.
sexy show is coming to an end. I cannot believe it. Each
We're
time
just getting turned on.
Yeah, that's right. Each time we talk about sex, it goes by so fast. It's really amazing. Anyway, we have been talking about sex, and I think we have to talk about this some more, because it just goes by so fast, and we're just scratching the surface here. But I would like to invite the audience to start thinking about this, not as so much as a mechanical and purely devoid of any significant, too casually, but think about it more in terms of something that is, what should I say, long-lasting feeling, so that we can share that with our children in a more positive way. And again, I am sorry that time is running out. I appreciate your presence here tonight, and hopefully maybe we can go back and discuss some more. But our show is America's Healthcare Crisis. We have talking about sex, and we just have to talk about it more, because it's a very important subject, and I would like to invite you to share with us how you feel about the subject, so that we know in what direction we should go the next time. Again, I'm Dr. Hung Vu. Our show is America's Healthcare Crisis. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Someone, have you ever cared? Do you miss someone? Have you ever shared? Do you need someone to always be there when you feel lonesome and deep in despair? Do you need someone?